In this video, we're going to be talking about Adobe After Effects expressions. Expressions are a mathematical, or I should say, a programmatic way of making animations. So we can animate with keyframes, but there's also another way to animate, and that is with expressions. Now, an expression in After Effects is like JavaScript. It's a scripting language, and currently, the JavaScript language is basically what's used inside of After Effects. So most of the rules apply. You can do things like variables, arrays, and some kind of basic functions. And what that looks like is code. And what we can do with expressions is create animations that happen without having to create keyframes, which can have its benefits, especially if you have things that are going to happen all the time or they're going to be repetitions. So in After Effects here, I have a composition right now with two layers. That's actually just one object here. This layer below is being parented. This is the parenting option. So if I parent a layer, basically, and I move it, both of them will move together. And if I undid the layering, the parenting, you would see that, well, we get two separate objects. So it's not what we want. We just want to keep the parenting situation going. So I'm going to assign that. And now we can start playing around with expressions. The most basic expression that you're going to find in After Effects is the wiggle expression. There's a bunch of different ways that you can get to the wiggle expression. If I twirl this open, we have this add button. And if I click on the add button, there's wiggle paths and wiggle transform. So those will give you some options for the wiggle, but that's not the programmatic way of doing it. So if I twirl this open, you'll see that we have wiggles in seconds, correlation, temporal phase, spatial phase, random seed. And right now this isn't doing just anything yet. So I'm going to delete this. And so the way that we can do wiggle with expressions is by choosing a property. So remember, in After Effects we can animate the position, scale, rotation, and also we can animate the anchor point. So for example here I'm going to type in P for position. So let's say I want to fluctuate this shape up and down or side to side or anything like that. So if I hold down the Option key or the Alt key on PC, click on the keyframe, now we're in the expression editor. So this is After Effects expression editor. This is a new version of the editor. It's more like some scripting editors that are out there, like Sublime Text and some of the other editors out there. And by default, it gives you this expression, which is doing nothing. It's just basically capturing the position at its current position, which is redundant, and we don't need that. So to use the wiggle property, we just literally type in the word wiggle. And you'll notice that the After Effects expression editor gives us these hints. So if I hit Enter key now, I have a wiggle expression, but it's not done yet. Wiggle accepts two parameters, and the two parameters are X and Y on a regular 2D layer, and you can use 3D on a 3D layer. So the first value is going to apply to how much movement I want on the X. So let's say I type in 40. So that'll mean the wiggle property will go back and forth, left and right, from 0 to 40. And then in the Y property, let's say we do 100. So that means it's going to go up and down by 100. So you don't have to, but I always do include a semicolon at the end of the expression. And that basically just completes the expression. You notice how those brackets change color. And then click away from the layer to make sure that you don't have any errors. If you do have an error, you'll see a yellow bar that will appear here. It'll tell you that you have an error in your expression that you need to go and fix. So without adding any keyframes, I now have this animation, and this might not play over the recording, but you can see what's happening here. And the speed is jumping all over the place because we have a great distance to travel between the X and the Y. There's a little bit of, we can add a motion blur effect to this. So now if I play that, you'll get that blur effect that's coming through there. It almost looks transparent. So if we change these numbers, and this is one of the things that you can do. So let's say that I bring this down to just 4. And instead of 100, let's just make this 40. And again, just click away, make sure there's no errors. I'm going to play through that. Now you see that the motion is a little bit slower. So the higher the values that we have, the faster the motion. The lower the values that we have, the slower the motion. Now, what I was talking about earlier with variables is that expressions can have variables. So instead of using these exact values 4 and 40, we can assign those to variables. For example, I could say x equals 4, and then I can say y equals 40. And then in the actual, I'll get a semicolon there, and then in the actual wiggle, I can say x, and I can say y. And then we have the same animation, but now changing the animation just only requires me to change the values in the variables. And a variable is just a container that holds a value, and the value can change at different times. So instead of 4, maybe this is 14. Instead of 40, let's make this 70. And see what happens here. So there should be more up and down motion now. And you can see what's happening there. It's a little erratic, and that's what the wiggle transform does. It's going to make things move. And it also depends on your frame rate. So if I go to composition and I go to composition settings, this is set to 30 frames per second. If this was a lower frame rate, like 12 frames per second, and I clicked OK, this transformation, this wiggle, is going to look a little bit more choppy, right? So it depends on that frame rate. So I'm going to go back to composition settings, and I'll just put this back to 30 and click OK. So that's wiggle. And you can wiggle on 2 axes like we're doing here. And you wanted to do it on 3 axes. We would need to turn this option on to make it a 3D layer. So I'm going to just delete this. We'll make this into a 3D layer. And now we have all of these X, Y, and Z properties. So for example, for the position property now, I'm going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key, click on position. That will give me the expression. And I'm going to add in 3 different wiggle values here. And then I'm going to apply that to the 3 values. So the first thing is we have a variable called A. And we're going to do a wiggle there. And it's going to be 3 and 25. And I have a variable called B. Again with wiggle, this one's going to be 5 and 10. And then I have another variable called C with a wiggle of 2 and 150. And then below that, we pull everything together in it's kind of like an array. Anytime you see brackets, it's usually an array. So an array just is a collection of different variables. So open bracket, A is 0. We start with 0. That's for X. And then B, open bracket, 1. That's for Y. And then C, open bracket, 2. And that is for the Z value. Now, if we did this right, I click away. I don't get any errors. And then if we play through this, you can see kind of what's happening here. So it's moving up and down and left and right. And then if we were to change the camera to a custom view, we'd also see, and you can see that it's moving forward in space and back in space. And I need, this is applying to this layer, which is interesting. So then I'm going to go back to the active camera, and that's wiggle. In the next video, we'll take a look at math operators.